Well folks, we're on part 2 of the 1947 Planet Junior PB1 repair and startup. So in part 1 we ended up going through this engine. It's a Briggs & Stratton model NPR6. It has a 6-to-1 gear reduction hub on the back side of it. And this turned out to be a very nice running engine despite the heavy rust buildup and everything inside of the cylinder and the stuck rings that we had to deal with. But it turned out to be a good runner, no knocks, no smoke or anything like that. So that'll be ready to go back on when everything is said and done with the chassis right here. And this is what we're going to be doing in part 2, is getting this all squared away, lubricated, and freed up and everything. I know the sickle bar is pretty well stuck, so I want to get the drive system pulled apart on it and get all that greased and oiled up. And the same thing goes for the drivetrain on the tractor body itself. And then of course I had mentioned, I think it was in part 1, that this engine mounting plate right here has been broken off of one of the frame rails. As you can see, there's 3 welds here, and that ended up splitting. So we're gonna have to get that welded back on as well. So first thing we're gonna do is get this disassembled a little ways and get the sickle bar pulled off of here, and then we can start on the tractor itself. Alrighty, so we're going to start with getting the sickle bar pulled off the front of this thing. And you guys might have saw that the handlebars were also missing from this thing too when I panned over it. And I took those off last week because I had to get somebody's Gravely 16G rider in here on the lift table for some repairs. And I didn't want to put this thing outside, so I ended up taking the handlebars off of it and stuffing it up to the back of the shop. That way I could keep it under cover for the snow that we've been getting. So this sickle bar goes on, it's pretty simple. It's got there's a slot in the front of the frame rails here where this bar goes into, which is kind of similar in some ways to a lot of the other walk-behind tractors of the era. Even like the Simplicities that I have, there's always a slot in the front of the frame, and then those ones go into a slot and they pivot up into another slot in the side of the frame, and then they lock in with bolts. Whereas this one goes into a slot, and then you just saw me take 2 3/8 bolts out of either side here, and that seems like it pins it in. And of course you get the control rods and everything for the belt tensioner. So this thing should slide out of here with any luck. So similar to the HT when we were working on that, I am going to pull this drive chain off of here, because granted it's freed up and it's moving and there's a lot of old grease and stuff on it. I'd really rather pull it off and scrub the thing off in the parts washer and just get all the heavy crap and stuff off of it, and then re-oil it, make sure everything's moving like it should. So I found the master link here on the side, and I can pop it off from right here. Then the belt tensioner for the sickle bar can come off too. That runs in between the frame rails here on the pivot. And that is going to have to get lubed up, because I know it's pretty dry, so it's going to need some new grease. And it gets us out of the way. That way we can take care of this issue right here. Get that squared away too. Alright folks, so this was the main thing I had to fix with this tractor, is this broken engine mounting plate. As you can see, it's completely busted off the left-hand frame rail. And this tractor does have a lot of torque on it when you have an attachment on the front of it. Just torque on the frame rails doing this, because when I was moving it around with the handlebars, they're wooden, they're not the most sturdy things in the world, and then of course with that sickle bar mounting mainly off of one side, as you guys can see. So a lot of the torque is hanging out on this side, pushing down on it, which is going to twist this frame rail back and forth, which most likely is what fatigued these welds and then ended up cracking them, because this whole thing is bolted together, as you can see. There's just two main frame rails that run down to here, and then the only ones that are welded are the handlebar rails that come up, and those are welded right to the differential right here on either side. And then everything else from here on up to the main frame is all bolted. So if the bolts come loose over time or anything like that, it is gonna kind of weaken the structure of the frame. And then of course the welds up here are gonna take the brunt of it, because this plate is pretty much what ties this entire thing together and takes a lot of that force. So what we're gonna do is get this outside onto a bench, and then I can get everything ground up, and we can get everything trued up and measured as it should be, or at least as close as it's gonna be for a 1947 piece of equipment, and then get this re-welded back onto the engine plate. Alrighty folks, so we get a little change of plans. I'm gonna be welding this in the garage, because the MIG welder I have is got shielding gas in it, and it's a fairly windy day outside, so I don't think it's gonna work out all too well, and we don't have much to do anyway. So what I did is I ended up taking these frame rails right off of the tractor. As you can see, I get everything broken down. There's not much to these things, and it was only a couple of more bolts, so I figured I'd just pull it the rest of the way apart. That way I can get everything done properly and trued up the best I can. So these frame rails, if you measure them in between, they're only about 4 5/16 to 4 1/4 inch wide on the inside, and it kind of depends on where you measure it when it's in the tractor. And then the front here, if I measure it, because I have the welds lined up right where they broke on the sides, and these measure 4 3/8. And I have another one of these PB1 Planet Juniors up on the hill. It's a couple of years newer because it's got metal handles, and if I measure that one, the frame rails are about 4 1/4 to 4 5/16 wide on the inside. So what we're going to do is get it lined up. This one was sitting at about 4 5/16 when it was all together, give or take all the way down. So we're going to get this lined up so it's 4 5/16 through. But I am going to do my best to line up these welds right where they broke at the factory position, as inaccurate or accurate as it might be, whatever the case. And I'm going to get them cleaned up and ground down, but I'm going to leave just enough of the old weld in a couple of spots. That way I can get it pushed back into location. And then of course we're going to have to get everything jigged up on this I-beam. Engine mounting plate and frame rails have all been prepped and ready for weld. So as you guys can see, I ground off all the old weld except for just the corners of it, which you can barely see. I left a tang right there on the middle one, and then the end of it just kind of right in this area. That way I could line both of the rails up, or line the rail and the engine mounting plate up rather, with where it originally broke off from where it was welded at the factory. Granted, it wasn't the most precise thing in the world, but it's going to get me just about right there. So I have those ground out, and then what I also did on the underside is I ground 2 more spots out for 2 more new welds, and that's going to be here and here, which is in between the welds on the outside. Because of where this plate mounts on the edge of this rail, it doesn't have much structural integrity because it's the edge of the plate mounting to the edge of a rail versus on this rail where it's flush on this plate. And it has a lot more structural integrity for getting pulled and twisted and turned, and the torque that this tractor is going to have with an attachment on the front of it. Because these have nice welds on them. Someone actually did a decent job on these with a stick welder, and they're holding up well, whereas this one, the guy ended up actually missing on the side here and a little bit in the middle on these ones, which I think is why it originally broke. But regardless of that, with these welds on the inside here, it'll give it something else to pull up against as this frame twists and torques around, instead of just pulling on these outside welds and not having a really good mounting surface where it mates up to this bar. Now that the plate is all prepped and ready for welding, we have to jig this thing up so that way I can weld it. So I went ahead and pulled some angle iron out of the steel rack, and we're going to clamp some of this down to this I-beam, and then we can clamp all this stuff to it to true it up. Frame rails and engine mounting plate are all jigged up and ready for welding. So I did measure between these rails, and we have a slight taper going back. It's about 4 5/16 right here and just a hair under 4 3/8 here, which is about what we want, because this did have a little bit of a taper on the tractor when everything was still bolted together. Granted, this was broken, but everything from here back that was bolted to the drivetrain did taper backwards. So we'll be all set, and we're ready to get this thing welded up. Engine mounting plate and the frame rail is welded up nicely. So everything took pretty well to the metal. I did have to grind out this first weld right here. You can see just on the inside of it. That way the brass ID tag can get re-riveted, because it was just riding up on it just a little bit. And then these two welds I did underneath, those took took well as well. So the frame and the engine plate are all set, so now we can start the process of cleaning up the rest of the tractor and reassembling this little by little. Cleaning this up is going to be pretty straightforward. I'm not going to get too extensive with it. I mainly just want to focus on all the drive components, such as the axle here and the jack shaft and all the chains and everything like that, along with the wheel hubs for the drive pawls, and make sure everything in here is all degreased so the pawls move as they should. I'm not going to worry about stuff like this on the tractor itself, because obviously enough, I'm not going to be restoring or painting this thing right now, so that grease buildup can stay, because it's just going to really protect the metal from anything. The weather and moisture and all that stuff. So anyways, folks, this is all pretty much self-explanatory, so I am going to set up the camera. I'll do a little bit of time lapse and some clips here and there, and I'll check back with you guys when we're all degreased and ready for reassembly. Everything has been cleaned up and ran through the parts washer. This thing had a lot of old, really hard, encrusted grease on it, which I guess for a 78-year-old machine it's bound to have, with dirt mixed in and everything else. So all that's been scrubbed up and cleaned off, and now we're ready for reassembly. Alrighty, so I wanted to slow down and show you guys how these drive pawls go together in here for the wheel drive. So these are the little pawls that go in here. They're just hardened pieces of square stock, and they're going to go in like so. And then when this hub ends up at the bottom, gravity pulls them down like that, and then they fall down and they catch up against these teeth, and that's what creates your wheel drive. So we got to put some lubricant in here. I'm not going to grease these up too much. I have to grease them just to get them to stay in here while I slide the hub together, but I'm not going to grease these tracks. I took a lot of really old hardened grease out of there, and I don't want these pawls sticking in there over time when the grease starts to solidify. So I am going to grease the inside of this hub. There's 2 machined lands in here. This land right here is the one that all the pawls ride up against, so it'll kind of keep them in place, and then the machine land right here is going to hit right there. So I want to make sure there's enough grease inside of there. Keep everything moving like it should. And if we add a little bit of oil to it, it'll keep it nice and slick so it doesn't get too sticky, keeping those pawls from moving. Alright, and before that last one goes in, just gotta grease this axle up and slide everything right together. I'll stay there just well enough where I can get this wheel on, provided I can get the grease off my hands first. That way I can grab it. And it just slides together like so. And now, if that pawl falls into place, unless it's stuck with the grease, there we go. So now you can hear them inside. They're falling into place and riding over those nubs on the inside of this hub, those catches, and that's going backwards with the wheel. And as soon as it goes forward and starts to drive, everything locks up, and then the system starts to drive the tractor forwards. Frame and the drivetrain are all put back together. So as you can see, I got all the idler arms and everything else back onto here, along with the chain guard and the toolbox. I just went ahead and get everything wrapped up. I also have all linkages for the sickle bar mower drive put back on. The turnbuckle down there has all been freed up, and everything is greased up and ready to go. So the last thing we have to do on this is get the sickle bar mower all freed up and greased up. And this is a 36-inch model B58 sickle bar mower. I don't know if it just fits the BP1s or if it'll fit other small Planet Juniors. It took me a little while to find the model number of this thing digging around online. This is going to need a little bit of freeing up work. I know the knife bar on here is stuck, along with the counterweight bar on the back. The actuator arm, we're going to have to pull that out, along with this funky drive knuckle up inside there. That's all going to have to get cleaned up and degreased and everything else. So a little bit of work to do, but we'll see if we can get everything squared away and back to working again. So what I'm going to do is get everything stripped off of here from the actuator lever here down. That way I can take that sickle bar head apart to some degree and see if I can get everything knocked loose on that. So what I'm doing now is getting all the clips and everything that holds the actuator lever and the knife bar in place. As you can see here, I just unbolted these 2 clips right here. So now that frees up my actuator lever. You can see that jiggling around some. And then what I'm going to do is where the clips are bolted on that hold this knife bar in on the other side, I'm going to loosen up whichever bolts go through the rock guards in relation to those clips. And then it'll relieve the pressure from this knife bar, and I can slide that out and get everything cleaned up. Sickle bar has all been disassembled down to the point where I can get everything cleaned up. So I wanted to show you guys what everything looks like before it gets all wire wheeled and scrubbed up and everything. And this is the knife bar. It's got 2-inch knives on it, and they're not in too bad a shape. They're actually respectfully decent looking down it. It's pretty darn straight, folks, compared to some of these things that I've pulled apart. They haven't been completely abused and been eating rocks and all that stuff, which is good. So I know these will take an edge. They're not exactly dull, but they're not exactly sharp, and they're not all beat up either on the edge. So I know I can clean those up with a flap disc. I'm going to get this whole thing wire wheeled top and bottom, and the rest of the parts here, those are going to have to get all scrubbed up in the parts washer and degreased. And as for the sickle bar head itself, where the rock guards are, all I'm going to do is just get this track here wire wheeled up. There's really not much in it for flaky or crusty rust or anything like that, so any of the light surface rust will come off when I start using this thing. And then I'm going to see if I can get these ledger plates right here on the rock guards cleaned up with some hardened steel and just scrub those down so we have somewhat of a decent shearing surface when everything goes back together. Sickle bar is all cleaned up and ready for reassembly. So everything turned out pretty well between the wire wheel and the parts washer. As you guys saw from the clips, I got all this wire wheeled and cleaned up. I also ran some tool steel over these ledger plates here and scraped off the rust, so we should have a pretty good shearing surface on there now. And I cleaned up all the hardware and everything for the clips, and the only rock guard that I pulled off. I didn't wire wheel everything in its entirety. As you can see, there's still rust on the top. That way it kind of blends in with the character of the rest of the machine. There's not fresh metal showing everywhere. So those are all set. The counterweight bar is all set. Actuator rod and all that stuff is all squared away. Those are all degreased, all those parts. And the knife bar actually came out pretty well too. I did wire wheel it, and granted they are old knives, but as you can see, like so right there, I did go over it with the flap disc, and I actually got a pretty darn good edge put back onto these, so those are good and usable still and should just cut just fine when everything is reassembled. So now we can go ahead and put everything back together. And I forgot to put on the belt, of all things. Well, that takes care of that, folks. The sickle bar is all back together. Everything moves really nicely. Pretty happy with the way it turned out. It's all snugged up and ready to go. So now it's time to mount it back onto the tractor. And now that the sickle bar is all mounted up, we can go ahead and remount the engine. Alrighty folks, so the last thing we have to do to this Planet Junior is get these wooden handlebars all squared away and treated. So what I went ahead and did is I did a little bit of research and I found some varnish for these. This is Rust-Oleum brand Spar varnish. It's a clear marine varnish. It got very good reviews online. Seems to be a very good product. So I'm going to try it on these handlebars and see how it holds up. It's for boats and marine applications. So granted, this tractor is going to be covered most of the time with a tarp. It's just the moisture on humid days and on rainy, foggy days that I want to keep from getting back into these handles again. So we're going to give this a shot and see how it does. So as you can see on this crossbar right here, I already have it sanded down a little bit, and I just did the end of it. As you can see right here, it's a little bit yellowed from the varnish. So I'm going to put about 2 or 3 coats on this. That seems to be the ticket from what guys are writing in, to get a nice solid finish that's well preserved on the wood, or that preserves the wood well. So what I am going to do is these handlebars, as you can see on the inside of them, they still have the Planet Junior lettering. So I'm going to do what I can to preserve that. Hopefully when I put this varnish on here, it doesn't mess it up too bad. But I am going to sand these down because I really want to get rid of this gray looking wood, and I'd rather have a finish like that when everything is said and done. So I'm going to sand these from about here to here. So everything else will be sanded, but everything on the inside, that's what I meant to say, everything on the inside here where the lettering is going to remain just like this. But I am going to clean up the wood all the way around it, and then we can get a couple of coats of this varnish put on here. So here you can see a side-by-side comparison from the left-hand handlebar that I just sanded compared to the right side. So I got rid of all that gray weathered wood look to it, and I brought it right back down to the original, I guess you could say original color of the wood, which is kind of nice. And some antique things I do like with that weathered look like that, like this bar has right here. But for this Planet Junior, I really wanted to have it with nice finished handles, at least as well as I could get them. And I didn't take everything off. You can see I left the rust ring from the washer, and there's some gray weathering on it, along with on the other side. And then the paint down here from the handlebar brackets. So this side didn't come out as good as I'd hoped it would, with leaving the lettering on there. You can see it kind of looks a little bit out of place just in the middle of the handlebar, and hopefully the varnish will kind of ease the transition from here into the printing on either side where I left it. It didn't really contrast very well, but unfortunately this printing or stamping, however they did this, does not extend down into the wood. It's not like it's been burned in there, so if you run over this with a sander, it will wipe the lettering and everything out of it. So I just have to be careful about that. But it is on the inside of the handlebar, so the first thing that you will see is the nice finished edge on the outside. So this one's all set. I do have to run over it with some lighter grit sandpaper before we start to varnish, so now I can get the right hand side all squared away as well. Alright folks, so as you can see, these handles are all set and ready for the varnish. So I started out with 80 grit when I did these on the sander, and then I finished everything off with 220 grit, so it left a nice smooth surface for the varnish and everything like that. And then of course I vacuumed off the handles and stuff to get all the dust and everything off of them. So I'm going to shoot for 3 coats and see how it does. I have to wait 8 hours in between coats when putting this stuff on, but I think it'll preserve these handles nicely and dress them up quite a bit too. Unfortunately, you might be able to see it in that one on the camera. This does darken up what little logos are left on the side here with the script and everything where it says Planet Junior. And it was kind of I wasn't sure whether it was gonna end up wiping them out or not, or making them unreadable. But I suppose from 1947, we're pretty fortunate that they lasted this long, because the majority of these that I see, the walk-behind tractors, more so than the hand-push seeders and stuff that people have in their barns, the tractors always have this logo missing on them. So I was pretty fortunate that this one made it this long. So it stinks if we lose it once everything dries, but I think it'll be there, just a little bit more faint than before. So I'll get this all wiped down and let these dry and put a couple more coats on throughout the next few days, and I think we'll be all squared away and ready to go. Well folks, here we are about 8 or 9 months later from when you saw me doing the handlebars in the cellar, getting those all prepped and varnished. So it took me a little while to get back to this project. I've had a rather busy year this year, and I finally got around to finishing up this video, and I want to get this uploaded for you guys and show you what the end result of this machine was. So as you can see, the lettering on the inside of these, unfortunately we did lose the lettering. You can see the little planet right there, and then of course it would have Planet Junior and the rest of the wording up on the inside. And I really like that Spar Marine varnish that Rust-Oleum has. It did a very, very nice job with preserving this wood, but unfortunately it doesn't do the screen printing or whatever they used here on the printing for the logos on the inside of the handlebar any justice. So unfortunately we kind of lost those. They're still there faintly. But like I said, they're the original handlebars for this machine, which is sort of a feat within itself with most of these. A lot of them I see for sale are rotted off. So the crossbar here, I also screwed that in. If you can see it in the sunlight, I have a brass flathead screw on that side, and of course one here. So I pre-drilled those and countersunk them in. That way it shores up this crossbar a little bit, and the handlebars won't twist like so as much, because they were pretty well warping around when I first got this tractor. So I did have this going over the summer, and I brought it to one of the tractor shows. I didn't get a chance to cut with it because I ran into 2 issues. One, the right-hand tire, the drive pawls for it stopped working, or they were engaging sporadically. They weren't engaging as nicely. The left-hand side drives pretty darn well. And I also lost the tire on this side. As you guys can see, that sucker blew out, I think the day of when I was loading up for one of the tractor shows, which was kind of a bummer. So I wasn't able to finally do a mowing video with this as I intended to do and run it around and everything. But aside from that, the whole machine, everything is back together. The engine runs pretty darn well, and the sickle bar is all together and working and functional. So as someday, as time goes, if I run across another set of tires for this, I can swap that one out and get that squared away along with the drive pawls, and then maybe do a little bit of sickle bar mowing with this thing and see how it does. Kind of a hokey machine, the way it all mounts up and mounts together and stuff, but be very curious to see how the thing cuts. So I'll get it fired up for you guys and I can show you the operation of the sickle bar mower. Well, folks, there you have it. Hope you all enjoyed the series, and that's all for the 1947 Planet Junior PB1 Repair and Startup.